Did everybody get a bulletin? With Bernie on the front. Well, take a look at it. Take a look at the picture. Does Bernie know what he's going to do? Is he waiting to be told? What does he want to do? Does he want to pick up that toy? Does he want to come see the camera? He seems to be anxious to do something. And probably we look like that more than we think. I ended my last sermon with a verse from Isaiah saying, whether you turn to the right or turn to the left, you'll hear a voice behind you saying, this is the road, this is the right road, walk down that road. We all want to be on the right road and headed in the right direction. And we have the freedom to not choose the right road. Am I correct? I like to think about freedom of choice. I like to talk about freedom of choice. But in real life, it's not so simple. Yogi Berra made it humorously sound easy. He said, when you see a fork in the road, take it. However, before you take the fork, you have to decide which way you're going to go. You are in the valley of indecision, or the valley of decision, however you want to look at it. In my 76 years of life, no one ever has asked me for counsel to become less certain. Have you ever had the desire to become more uncertain? Lord, I want to be uncertain in my heart. Nah, we don't do that. Quite the contrary. We long for a pathway, a road less traveled. That's what the famous book by M. Scott Peck offered. But most of the time, we create our own pathway by walking even when we have no idea where we're going. Of course, we all have, delicious times of clarity, times of certainty, confidence, and purpose. Actually, probably more than most of us recognize. Most days, many days, are filled with easy, seamless decisions. But the uncertain times stand out because they're so uncomfortable. They create anxiety, fear. Uncertainty creates vulnerability. Living the mystery means dancing with uncertainty. Dancing with certainty and uncertainty, knowing and not knowing. Let me illustrate by an actual story I heard recently. True story. My friend, a well-educated friend, was working at the hospital one day and he was called to the ER. There had been a terrible accident and his father-in-law was in serious, critical condition. My friend said he did not have the medical power of attorney in this situation. The hospital couldn't contact any next of kin, and a decision had to be made. After quickly sizing up the situation, my friend said, "I do not have the authority to make this decision, but I know what my father-in-law would want. He would not want to live like that. He would want you to let him go." And that's what they did. They let him go, and he quickly died. I've never had to make that decision. Have you? Has anybody had to make that decision? That'd be a tough one. Being paralyzed by indecision is really not an option. Not deciding is a choice. And it's in the valley of indecision, that's where the action is. And there are always consequences. There isn't a single character in the Bible who understood beforehand the outcome of any journey he or she underwent. These characters are masters of the dance between certainty and uncertainty. Think of Abraham and Sarah, Moses, Ruth. Think of Daniel or Esther. Did they know what was going to happen? Are you getting the picture? All of them and all of us are reluctant to go on our journey. Every one of those people and every one of us takes risks without knowing how things are going to turn out. And every one of them had massive doubts along the way. And every one of them needed reassurance that things will be okay. And not one of them fully completes what he or she sets out to do. Sound familiar? That's kind of life. 49 years ago, I was wrestling with one of the biggest decisions in my life. I was a major in the United States Air Force. I was living in Germany and practicing dentistry. But I was being called to something different. Seriously, I was being called like Abraham to travel to an unknown place that would become my home. 5 Seventh-day Adventist conferences I'd written to, asking, is there a dental need in your area? Is there a dental opportunity? One responded. A guy by the name of George W. Liscomb from Pierre, South Dakota. He said, "Sure, can we meet in Vienna, Austria at the General Conference this coming summer in 1975? So that was the plan. I drove from Western Germany, close to Luxembourg, all the way across Germany to the southeastern corner. And right there is where Germany joins up with Austria at Salzburg. We crossed the border and went all the way across Austria to the other end where Vienna is on the Danube River. Elder Liscomb and I met at the appointed time and place. It was a good meeting. And would you believe it, but he knew all, he knew my parents, He knew all four of my grandparents. He knew all of my uncles and aunts, and that's not a big deal because I don't have very many. But he also had the funeral for my great-grandfather. He told me, well, when you're out of the military and come back to the States, contact me and we will see what we can do. There's opportunity. By faith, I left a good career, and I had no idea where I was going. People would ask, where are you going when you get out? My answer was, somewhere in South Dakota. Where in South Dakota? I don't know yet. I got out of the military, and in February of 1976, I drove from Ohio, which is where my parents lived, to Pierre, where Elder Liscombe arranged for me to go to 3 different places to evaluate dental practice opportunities. I liked the Murdo mission field from the start, but I knew it would only be a 2-day-a-week practice, at least to begin with. But before you can practice dentistry, you need to have certain credentials. I was a dentist, all right, but I didn't have, I'm not sure what it's called, the regional board. And so I had to take a board examination. And the nearest one was Kansas City. Well, that examination was 3 days. It involved working on 3 live patients with 3 different dental procedures. And I was living in Germany, and where are you going to find that? I also had to take several written exams. Well, a colleague who was stationed with me both in Saigon and in Bitburg, Germany, was practicing dentistry in Topeka, Kansas. That's only an hour away from Kansas City. And he helped me get real live patients. And so I would drive about an hour with the patient, do the work, and take the test, and then drive them back, and 3 days. I found out that after I took the test that I scored the highest of anybody that took the examination. That's only because all the different examiners from the different states had a pool, and whoever got the best score, then everybody had to treat him for, dinner. So, well, then in the middle of May, I had to take the South Dakota. It's called a jurisprudence test for the state board. And I passed that one, so that meant that in July of 1976, the 1st of July, I would be able to begin practicing dentistry. Before I had a place to live or anywhere else to work, the bank in Murdo, First Fidelity, loaned me the money to buy the building in Murdo, plus enough to set up a dental office. We looked for a place to live in Pierre, and another bank loaned me the money to buy a house in Camelot. Then I decided to go door to door and ask all the dentists in Pierre if they needed some part-time help. I drove to Fort Pierre and knocked on Carmen Sutley's door, and we both shocked each other. His son had just left the practice to go to an oral surgery specialty 2 weeks before. Carmen said, can you start next week? I said, well, I'll be able to work Monday, Tuesdays, and Fridays, but could I begin in 2 weeks, like the 1st of August? I spent those 2 weeks setting up the office in Murdo. I hired the only person who applied to be a dental assistant, so there was no decision there. She still works for me. She works with the building down there, 47 years later. No formal training back in those days. I taught her. I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. By an act of faith, Abraham said yes to God's call to travel to an unknown place that would become his home. When I left the military, people asked, "Where will you go?" I had no idea where I was going to go. I'd never heard of Murdo. All I knew was that I was going to go somewhere in South Dakota where I only knew one person. No relatives, no family, no friends. I let the Lord lead me, just like Abraham. Nobody thought I would succeed. But I prayerfully trusted, and somehow between February and July 26th of 1976, I went from a well-paid major in the United States Air Force to a fully licensed dentist in South Dakota, owner of a medical dental building in Murdo, owner of a home, and a 3-day-a-week associate in a dental practice. Now, is that a miracle? Hebrews 11:1, and I'm going to read from the Jim Szana version, says, "The fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in the Lord, this faith, is the firm foundation of everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. Hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? God said to Abraham, 'Go forth to the land I will show you,' and both Abraham and I achieved that. But now let's get back to real life as it is usually lived. Both Abraham and I made some terrible decisions. A lot of them. Because the times of not knowing far outweigh the certainties. Parenting is a perfect example of this. Parenting is an unknown journey for anyone who undertakes it. Am I right? Can anybody agree? Just when we think we've got the swing of the baby stuff, then we have a toddler. And then when we think we have a toddler all figured out, then they're a school-age child, and then a teenager. At each stage, there's a whole new learning curve that begins. And it keeps on going and going. It doesn't quit. The times of not knowing far outweigh the certainties. Just like Bernie in this picture. He wants somebody to tell him what to do. Pick up the toy. Go this way. You want to have to go outside, go to the bathroom? He's waiting for some certainty. He's uncertain. So let me repeat that there isn't a single character in the Bible who understood beforehand the outcome of any journey that they undertook. And that the giants of the Bible were masters in the dance between certainty and uncertainty. Every one of them takes a risk without knowing how things will work out. And they all need reassurance that things would be all right. And none of them completely sets out, well, they set out to do things, but they don't completely fulfill what they set out to do. Does any of that sound familiar? Doubt is a prerequisite for any meaningful journey. Yet the yearning for certainty is part of being a human being. How many of you have wrestled with the pull and the push between the realization that you couldn't remain where you were, either mentally or physically? You just couldn't stay where you were. You had to do something. You were certain that there was more to life, but uncertain where you were headed or how you would get there. And if we're really honest with ourselves, when we look back on our lives, we can see that all of our decisions, large and small, were made from a place of uncertainty and sometimes profound conflict. Rarely have any of us had any idea where our decisions would lead. At other times, what we thought would happen turned out quite differently than planned. Uncertainties are part of the human drama. In the end, we must act on faith, not that it'll work out as we want, but that our best guess is good enough. In the 1800s, there was a philosopher named Franz Rosenzweig, and he taught that life is a succession of leaps into pathlessness. We take a path, we follow it, and then we must leap again. There's never a final decision. There's never a choice to end all choices. There's always a road not taken. No matter how many maps we read, no matter how hard we study the roads that we or others have taken in the past, the future is partially unknown. We move at the moment of decision from path to pathlessness. Now, as long as the path we're on takes us where we want to go, we barely notice it. We take in the sights and the smells and enjoy the rides, taking the bumps as they come until they get too big, or the path disappears, or it turns into a darker part of the forest. Or maybe the road's too straight and narrow, and then we feel trapped, frightened, or bored, and we have to retrace our steps or find another path or wander in the wilderness for a while. All of us have permission to act without knowing. And whether we acknowledge it or not, we're always doing it anyway. Certainty is the region of death. Uncertainty is the valley of life. The undecidable is where the action is, where the invitation to play and explore happens. The dance between indecision and decision. Jewish wisdom compares life to a scale. Every act tips the scale more toward life or more toward death. All of us are an accumulation of our actions. And by the way, being paralyzed by indecision is a decision. Not deciding results in consequences too. Indecision is as much a choice as changing one's course. It's just pathing by a different rhythm. So where does that leave us? Pretty much right where we started. Whether you turn to the right or you turn to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the right road. Walk down this road." Jesus told us to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. My favorite Bible verse, and I'm going to quote from my own version, is that it's impossible to please God apart from trust. And why? Because anyone who wants to approach God must both believe that he exists and that he cares enough to respond to those who seek him. He rewards those who diligently seek him. There is a God, and he's not silent. He cares for you. And you will find him when you search for him with all your heart. Have you decided to follow Jesus?